The air is thick with the weight of silence, a quiet so profound that it feels as though it could swallow us whole. In the crowded barracks, dozens of us sit or lie on the cold floor, staring at nothing, drifting into memories of lives left behind. Some murmur to themselves, words too soft to hear, voices too broken to lift. The guards' boots echo outside, each footfall a reminder of our captivity, a cadence of hopelessness that marks our days and nights in this place. I used to know the freedom of sound. I was a musician once, back in a life that feels more like a distant dream than a memory. The calluses on my fingers have softened over the months, my voice strained from the silence forced upon us. My name is Tomas, but here we're all just shadows. Shadows with numbers, stripped of everything but the faintest fragments of who we were. Then, a week ago, everything changed. In a stolen, impossibly fragile moment, a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of a small, makeshift radio. The device is hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a mess of wires and scrap parts, painstakingly assembled by Alan, a British engineer who used to repair radios for a living. How he managed to find the parts, how he risked the guards' wrath to put it together, I still don't fully understand. But he did, and with it, a sliver of freedom returned to us. It was late, well after the final inspection when the guards retreated to their posts, that Alan called me over to see his creation. He pulled me aside, his expression cautious but excited, and motioned for me to sit. At first, I thought he had just found something to sell to the guards for extra rations, but the second I heard the faint crackle of sound, I realized the gravity of what he'd done. "Listen," he whispered, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and fear. The radio was so quiet, barely more than a whisper of sound, but I strained to hear it. And then, through the static came a song. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakable. A familiar melody that instantly pulled me back home, to the concert halls, the crowded streets, and the warm embrace of people who understood. In that moment, the camp walls faded, and for a heartbeat, I was free. Now, a week later, the radio has become our lifeline. Alan hides it well, and each night, we huddle together, taking turns, listening to songs that speak of home, of courage, of hope. It's dangerous, incredibly so. If the guards found it, they would destroy it without hesitation, and those of us responsible would face punishments that are as brutal as they are unspoken. Tonight, I sit beside Alan and Victor, a Russian who has become my closest friend here. He's a man of few words, but his presence is steady, grounding, a rock against the tide of despair. Alan fiddles with the radio, his hands moving with practiced precision, his face a mask of concentration as he turns the dial, trying to pick up the faint signals. I glance around the barracks, where a handful of us sit, each one staring with bated breath, hoping to hear something, anything, that will remind us of home. Each night, it's the same, this quiet, shared ritual, an unspoken agreement that this is our time. And tonight, we're not disappointed. The static clears just enough to hear a familiar tune drifting through the speaker, soft but unmistakable. A song from our homelands. The melody fills the space, wrapping around us, carrying with it memories of open fields, bustling markets, and warm fires on winter nights. I close my eyes, letting the notes seep into me, feeling the pulse of the music steady my breath, my heartbeat. The guards' footsteps echo in the distance, and we go still, waiting. They pass without slowing, and a collective sigh of relief fills the room. We're safe, at least for another moment. It's then that I feel a spark, a thought, a quiet yet relentless whisper in the back of my mind. This radio, this fragile, wonderful little machine, could be more than just a source of comfort. Could be a weapon, a voice, a way to reach beyond these walls, to remind those still fighting that we're here, that we haven't been broken. I turn to Alan and Victor, the idea taking shape in my mind, and before I can second-guess it, I speak. What if we could do more with this? I say, my voice barely above a whisper. What if we used it to send a message? To remind them we're still fighting, that we haven't lost hope. Alan looks at me, his eyes widening slightly. You mean, send messages through the music? I nod, feeling a surge of determination. Exactly. There are songs, traditional songs from each of our countries. Songs with specific patterns, rhythms. If we choose certain songs, or even specific parts of songs, those listening on the other side would know what we mean. They'd know it's us. Victor raises an eyebrow, his expression skeptical, but there's a glint of intrigue in his eyes. You're saying we code it, somehow? Use the songs like signals? Exactly. I can feel my heart racing, the thrill of possibility coursing through me. The people listening back home, they'd understand. They'd know we're alive. They'd know we haven't given up. Alan leans forward, his voice low, intense. It's risky, Tomas, if they catch on. If even one guard hears it, we're finished. They'd destroy the radio, and the punishment. He trails off, glancing toward the barracks door, where the guards pass like specters in the night. But Victor speaks up, his voice firm. What's freedom without risk? We're already prisoners, Tomas. This might be the only way to fight back. We sit in silence, each of us weighing the risks, the stakes. The radio crackles softly beside us, the music fading into static, and I can almost hear the voices of those still out there, waiting, hoping. It's a gamble, but in this place, hope is worth any price. I nod, my resolve hardening. We'll be careful, one song at a time, only the traditional ones, the ones that carry meaning. Alan agrees, his eyes dark with determination, and Victor nods as well, his jaw set. We don't speak of it again. There's no need. The plan is in place and each of us knows our role. Tonight, the radio plays on, but this time, it's more than just music. It's a promise. Tomorrow, we'll choose our song carefully, sending a message that can only be understood by those who know it by heart. And with every note, every beat, we'll remind the world that we're here, that we are more than prisoners, more than shadows. We are men who have not yet surrendered, soldiers who still remember the taste of freedom. As the song fades, a gentle hum filling the room, I close my eyes, feeling its echo settle into my soul. We are still here. We are still fighting. And through the music, our voices will rise. The next night, the plan is set. The radio waits beneath the loose floorboard, tucked away like a forbidden treasure. Its purpose now is powerful as it is dangerous. Alan, Victor, and I sit close, our faces cast in shadow, each of us tense, each of us bracing for what we're about to attempt. The others know something is different tonight. The silence in the barracks more charged than usual, as if the very air knows the stakes. Alan reaches for the radio, his hands steady but his gaze sharp with focus. One song, he whispers, glancing at me and then at Victor. One song tonight, nothing too long, just enough to make sure they know we're out here. Victor nods, his face set, determined. It'll be enough. They'll understand. I'm the one who suggested the song. It's an old folk tune, a melody known to almost anyone from our side of the border. My mother used to hum it as she worked, her soft voice weaving through the rooms of our house, a gentle reminder of peace. But tonight, that peace will be a call to arms, a reminder to anyone listening that their brothers and sons are still here, still fighting in whatever way they can. Alan dials the radio carefully, adjusting for the faintest of frequencies, and with a hiss, the static fades. The moment is almost surreal, the silence so deep that I can hear the pounding of my own heart. And then it begins. The song flows through the speaker, soft at first, but unmistakable, the familiar notes filling the barracks like a spirit from another world. The others lean in, some closing their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. I watch as the tension in their faces softens, the lines of exhaustion and fear easing, if only for a moment. I feel it too, a weight lifting from my chest as the music reminds me of a world beyond these walls, a world we all ache to return to. But we're not the only ones listening. The door to the barracks creaks open, and a guard's shadow stretches across the floor, his figure sharp against the dim light from the hallway. I freeze, my heart skipping a beat as he steps into the room, his eyes sweeping over us. The guard, Mahler, is one of the more vigilant ones, his gaze always searching, probing, as if he can sense the rebellion brewing beneath our silence. I nudge Alan, and he quickly turns the dial, smothering the song in a burst of static before tucking the radio away. Muller stops, his eyes narrowing as he takes a step forward, his gaze fixed on the huddle of men. The silence hangs heavy, each of us holding our breath, hoping he hasn't heard, hoping he won't press further. "What's going on here?" he barks, his voice harsh, slicing through the stillness. No one answers. We keep our heads down, our bodies rigid, every muscle tensed for the worst. Muller's gaze lingers on me, and for a moment, I feel the weight of his suspicion, the sharp edge of his scrutiny. My pulse pounds in my ears, the silence stretching, threatening to break. "Nothing to say?" he sneers, taking a step closer. "Think you're above the rules here? Above me?" Before I can respond, Victor speaks up, his voice steady but cold. "We're just waiting to sleep, sir. Nothing else." Muller's eyes flick to Victor, the sneer fading from his lips, replaced by a hard, calculating look. He steps back, giving us one last, lingering glance before he finally turns and leaves, his boots echoing down the hallway. The door slams shut behind him, and we release a collective breath, the tension in the room palpable. Alan wipes a bead of sweat from his brow, his hands shaking as he pulls the radio out once more. "That was close," he murmurs, his voice barely audible. "We can't let that happen again. One more slip-up, and we're finished." I nod, feeling the weight of his words settle heavily over me. He's right. We can't afford another close call. But even so, I can't ignore the thrill that still lingers, the quiet joy of knowing that our message made it out, that someone out there might have heard, might have understood. The next few nights pass in a haze of tension and anticipation. We're careful, listening to only the shortest of songs, snippets of melodies that serve as our quiet, coded messages. Each tune has meaning, a lullaby for those who still believe in peace, a victory march for those who refuse to surrender. Our music becomes a language, a secret only we understand, each note a message, each beat a pulse of rebellion. The others grow more involved, each man taking a turn, each one contributing a song that speaks to him, a melody that reminds him of home, of freedom. It becomes a ritual, a nightly vigil, our own quiet war against the silence imposed on us. And with every song, we feel a little less like prisoners, a little more like men. Then, one night, the unexpected happens. Alan turns on the radio as usual, his hands steady, his movements precise. But this time, instead of music, we hear something else, voices, faint but clear, speaking in our language. We exchange startled glances, our pulses quickening as we strain to listen, trying to catch the words through the static. "To all who are still out there, we hear you." The voice crackles, muffled but unmistakable. "Your message has reached us. We know you're alive and we haven't forgotten you. Hold on." Keep your spirits high. You are not alone. The words wash over us, a flood of hope so overwhelming that I feel my eyes sting, my chest tightening. We sit in stunned silence, letting the message sink in, each of us absorbing the simple, beautiful truth. We've been heard. Our songs, our defiance, our quiet rebellion. It wasn't in vain. Victor is the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. They heard us, he whispers, his gaze fixed on the radio. They know we're here. They know we haven't given up. I glance around the barracks, at the faces of men who, only moments ago, seemed hollow, empty. Now, they are alive, their eyes shining with something I haven't seen in months. A fierce, unbreakable hope. Alan turns off the radio, tucking it carefully beneath the floorboard. But the silence that follows is different now. It's charged with purpose, with a new resolve that fills the air like a song. As I lie back on the cold floor, the darkness no longer feels so heavy. There's a warmth inside me, a fire that refuses to die, and I know that as long as we have our music, our voices, our courage, we will endure. And as I close my eyes, I can almost hear it, the faint echo of our songs, carried through the night, a promise to those still fighting, a reminder that we are more than prisoners. We are men who will not be broken, and our voices will carry on the wind, defying the silence, reaching beyond these walls. Our songs are out there now, and they will find their way home. The news of our success spreads quietly, passed from man to man like a secret too precious to share openly. The camp doesn't feel so suffocating now. Even the guards' jeers seem muted, their cruelty unable to touch the quiet resolve that grows among us. At night, when the barracks fall silent, we gather close, each of us waiting, listening, for the next message, the next thread of hope from the other side. The next night, Alan tunes the radio again, his fingers precise, careful not to linger too long on any frequency. We don't know how often they'll respond or even if they'll try again, but every night we wait, hoping, listening. When the static finally gives way to the faint sound of music, a collective sigh of relief fills the room. Tonight, it's a familiar tune, a hymn, slow and mournful, the kind sung in villages after loss, in churches where families gather in times of grief. I look around, catching the expressions of the men. Victor stares at the floor, his jaw tight, the flicker of sadness in his eyes mirroring what I feel. It's as if the hymn carries with it the weight of everyone we've lost, everyone who's vanished into the war with no chance of coming back. I see the faces of my friends, my brothers, men who once sat beside me in our barracks before they disappeared, swallowed by the camp's relentless cruelty. But the hymn changes, shifting into something softer, gentler, a familiar folk song, one that speaks of resilience, of hope. The guards can't hear it, but they see us gathered, our backs straight, our gazes fixed, as if something greater than the walls surrounds us. For a moment, the music is a balm, mending the cracks in our spirits. Even in this place, something soft, something good remains. After the song fades, Victor looks up, his gaze focused, the grief in his eyes replaced by determination. "They're telling us to hold on," he says, his voice quiet but steady. "They want us to know we're not alone." Alan nods. It's working. The messages, they're reaching them. And if they can hear us, if they know we're here, we're not forgotten. There's a fire in his eyes, a spark I haven't seen in months, and it's contagious. But with every small victory, the risk grows. The guards notice the change in us, though they don't understand it. Our silence is defiance. Our hope is rebellion. Every night, they search harder, watch closer, and Mahler is relentless, his gaze sweeping over us like a hawk's, searching for the smallest sign of disobedience. One evening, he enters the barracks with two other guards, their faces twisted with suspicion. Muller's eyes narrow as he walks between the rows of bunks, his gaze cold, calculated, each step deliberate. He doesn't know about the radio, but he senses something, an energy that unsettles him, a quiet that feels too controlled. He stops in front of me, his gaze sharp, his lips pulling into a thin line. "You," he snaps, his voice slicing through the silence. "Stand." I obey, rising slowly, forcing myself to hold his gaze. The men around me shift uncomfortably, their faces tense, but I don't dare look at them. Muller's eyes narrow as he studies me, searching for any sign of weakness, any flicker of fear. "What's changed, huh?" He sneers, leaning in close. "Think I don't notice? You're all too quiet, too content." He spits the word as though it's a curse, his expression twisting with disgust. "I'll find out what you're hiding, and when I do, you'll wish you'd never set foot in this place." He waits, as if expecting me to break, to stumble, but I remain silent, meeting his glare with as much defiance as I can muster. Finally, with a snarl, he turns away, leaving the barracks with a slam of the door. As soon as he's gone, I release a shaky breath, my hands trembling. Alan touches my shoulder, his expression tight with worry. "They're getting closer," he murmurs. "It's only a matter of time before they find it. We need to be careful. We're running out of chances." I nod, understanding the weight of his words. But the thought of silence, of going back to a world where hope is just a memory, it's unbearable. The radio has given us a taste of something we can't surrender, and the others feel it too. For the first time, we feel like men again, men with a purpose, not just numbers in a system meant to grind us down. The following night, we gather once more, but there's a tension, a rawness, in the room. Muller's warning lingers in the air, a reminder that one wrong move could shatter everything we've built. Alan is particularly careful, his hands moving with painstaking precision as he adjusts the radio, keeping the volume low, barely a whisper, just enough for us to hear. The static fades, replaced by a slow, haunting melody, a song of our homelands, a tune that speaks of rolling hills, of endless skies, of freedom. The lyrics drift through the barracks, a gentle reminder of everything we're fighting for, of the lives we left behind. And then, in the middle of the song, there's a pause, a silence, followed by a faint, almost imperceptible series of beeps. Alan's eyes widen, his face pale as he listens. He understands at first the meaning behind those beeps. They're not just sounds, they're Morse code. "They're sending us a message," he whispers, his voice tight with awe. "They're speaking to us." We hold our breaths, each of us leaning in, straining to catch the sequence, to understand. Alan translates it, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Hold on. Reinforcements are coming." The words settle over us, a powerful current of hope that surges through the barracks. Reinforcements, allies, they're coming for us. We're not alone in this fight. But just as the last note fades, the door bursts open and Muller storms in, his face twisted with fury. He's holding something, a scrap of metal, a piece of broken wire. My heart plummets as I realize what it is. A part of the radio, a piece that Alan must have left behind by accident. In his hand, Muller holds the evidence of our rebellion. "You think you can play games with me?" Muller's voice is a roar, his face flushed with rage as he holds up the wire. "You thought I wouldn't find this?" The men go still, each of us frozen, waiting for the blow, the punishment we know is coming. But I glance at Alan, and he gives a slight nod, his eyes calm, as if telling me to hold steady, to trust him. Slowly, Alan steps forward, raising his hands, his gaze fixed on Muller. "It was me," he says, his voice strong, steady. "I made the radio." Muller's eyes narrow, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "Is that so?" He sneers, stepping closer to Alan, his hand raised. "Then you'll pay for this. You'll all pay." But Alan doesn't flinch, his gaze steady, defiant. "You can silence me," he says, his voice firm, unbreakable. "But you'll never silence us all." The guard sees Alan, dragging him from the barracks, but his words echo in the silence, filling the room with a fierce, unshakable hope. And as he disappears into the night, I feel something shift inside me, a resolve stronger than anything I've ever known. Alan may be gone, but his courage, his defiance, remains. And with every beat of our hearts, every whisper of song, we'll carry his message forward, keeping the fire alive. Tomorrow we'll sing again, and through every note, every breath, we'll let them know we are still here, we are still fighting. The days that follow Alan's arrest feel like a slow unraveling of everything we've built. The guards watch us with a suspicion that's thicker than ever. Muller prowls the barracks like a wolf, his eyes flicking over every face, every movement, searching for the slightest sign of rebellion. With Alan gone, there's an emptiness that lingers, a silence that settles heavily over us. I catch myself glancing at the floorboards where the radio used to be, wishing I could hear just one more song, one more voice from the outside to remind us that we're not forgotten. Alan's sacrifice weighs heavily on me, a constant reminder of the risks we've taken, the price we pay for hope. Victor is quieter than usual, his jaw set, his face lined with anger and something else, a grief he doesn't know how to express. One night, while the barracks sleep, Victor and I huddle close, speaking in whispers. "We can't let Alan's sacrifice be for nothing," I murmur, the urgency of my own words surprising me. "We have to keep going." Victor's gaze hardens, a flicker of fire in his eyes. "How, Tomás? Without the radio, what can we do? They'll watch our every move now." He's right, of course. Muller's suspicion is at an all-time high, and without the radio, our lifeline to the outside world is gone. But as I look around the dim barracks, the faces of the men around me shadowed, weary, I know we can't afford to let hope die. We're prisoners, yes, but we're still men. And Alan's sacrifice has shown us that even in the darkest places, we can still find ways to fight. We'll use our voices. I say, my words steady, fueled by a quiet determination. If we can't hear the music, then we'll make it ourselves. Songs are in our hearts, Victor. They can't take that from us. He stares at me for a moment, considering, and then, slowly he nods, his lips pressing into a thin, fierce line. "You're right," he says softly. "We'll sing, quietly, but enough that they'll hear us, enough that they'll know." The next night, we gather in small groups, each of us careful, alert, knowing that the guards could burst in at any moment. We keep our voices low, barely more than whispers, and as the night stretches on, our song begins. A haunting, quiet hymn, one of the songs Alan had picked up on the radio. The words are soft, almost too faint to hear, but the meaning is unmistakable. It's a song of remembrance, a promise that will hold onto our voices, our strength, no matter how hard they try to break us. The first night, our song is shaky, uncertain, but as the nights pass, the melody grows, our voices blending together, each note a thread in a web of defiance that stretches over us like a shield. The guards notice, of course. They glare at us, muttering to each other, suspicious but uncertain of how to respond. Singing isn't against the rules, but the intent behind it, the strength, the unity, it's a challenge they can feel, a force they can't ignore. One night, Mahler storms in, his face twisted in rage, his fists clenched as he stalks between the bunks, his boots pounding against the floor. "Enough!" he roars, his voice reverberating off the walls. "You think this will save you? You think a few songs will change anything?" We go silent, our gazes fixed on the floor, but the defiance in the room is palpable, a current that Mahler can't dispel. He grabs one of the men, a young soldier named Marco, and shoves him to the ground, his voice a sneer. "Let this be a warning," he growls, kicking Marco's side, his face a mask of contempt. "Keep up this foolishness, and you'll end up like your friend." Victor tenses beside me, his hands balling into fists, but I place a hand on his shoulder, shaking my head. We can't fight Muller directly. We have to choose our battles. Marco lies still on the floor, his face pale, his body curled in on itself, but as Muller steps back, the young soldier lifts his head, his gaze defiant, a small, unbreakable fire in his eyes. Muller leaves, slamming the door behind him, and for a long moment, we sit in silence, each of us processing the brutality we've just witnessed. But then, slowly, Marco begins to hum, a faint, trembling melody, a song from his village. His voice is weak, unsteady, but it cuts through the silence, filling the barracks with a quiet strength. One by one, we join him, our voices blending together, lifting each other up, building a wall of sound that Mahler's cruelty can't penetrate. The next morning, we're herded into the yard, a bleak, frozen patch of ground surrounded by high fences and watchtowers. The guards order us into rows, their faces impassive as they scan our ranks, searching for signs of defiance, of rebellion. But we stand tall, our faces lifted, our backs straight, each of us bracing against the cold with a newfound sense of purpose. As we wait, Victor begins to hum softly, the same song we sang in the barracks, his voice barely more than a whisper. The men around him pick up the tune, their voices joining his, until the song spreads through the rows, a quiet, defiant melody that resonates through the yard. The guards notice, their eyes narrowing, but they say nothing, unsure of how to respond, their authority slipping as the music rises. Muller steps forward, his face flushed with anger, his gaze fixed on Victor. "Stop this," he snarls, his voice low, dangerous. "One more sound, and you'll regret it." But Victor only lifts his head higher, his voice unwavering, his gaze steady. And as he continues to sing, his voice soft but unbreakable, the rest of us join him, each note a refusal, a promise that we will not be silenced. Muller's face twists in rage, and he raises his baton, his hand trembling with fury. But as he steps forward, a voice calls out from the edge of the yard. A soldier, his face pale, his eyes wide as he points to the road leading toward the camp. A convoy is approaching, a line of trucks and jeeps, their engines rumbling, their flags fluttering in the wind. Reinforcements. I can hardly believe it, my heart pounding as I realize that the messages, the songs, they worked. Someone heard us. Someone answered. The guards go tense, their faces taut with fear, uncertainty. They know what this means. They understand the power shifting, the control slipping from their grasp. As the convoy rolls into the camp, the gates swinging open to let them through, Muller's face goes pale, his gaze flicking between us and the approaching trucks. He stumbles back, his baton falling from his hand, his authority crumbling before our eyes. And in that moment, I feel a surge of triumph, a fierce, overwhelming pride that fills me from head to toe. We've won, not with weapons, but with our voices, with our songs, with the quiet, unbreakable strength that kept us alive. As the reinforcements sweep into the yard, their voices raised in commands, their faces filled with relief, I feel the weight of captivity lift, the chains around my spirit falling away. The men around me begin to cheer, their voices rising into the cold, clear air, each shout a testament to our endurance, our courage, our freedom. And as I look up at the sky, open and endless above us, I feel the echo of our songs, our defiance, drifting on the wind, a reminder that even in the darkest places, hope endures. For Alan, for every man who refused to surrender. For freedom,